For tens of thousands of years, humans have lived in what is now France. After migrating westwards across the European continent, these first inhabitants left behind traces of their everyday lives in some of the earliest artworks ever produced by mankind, such as the famous cave paintings of Lascaux, made between 15,000 and 20,000 BC. By the advent of the Iron Age around 1200 BC, most of what is now France had become home to Celtic peoples of the Hallstatt, and later Latin cultures, which also came to extend over the majority of Western Europe. In the far southwest of the country lived the Aquitanian people, who spoke a pre-Indo-European language related to Basque, and together with their Celtic neighbours laid the foundations for some of France's earliest settlements, such as Lutetia Parisiorum, modern Paris, Burdigala, modern Bordeaux, and Tolosa, modern Toulouse. These early societies soon began to trade not only with one another, but also further afield with the civilizations of the Mediterranean, which resulted in the ancient Greeks establishing the colony of Massalia, modern Marseille, around 600 BC on the southern coast. But it was out of this contact with the Mediterranean world that the land which would one day become France witnessed its first political, social, and cultural consolidation. During the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, the expanding Roman Republic set its sights on what it termed Gaul. Rome had already conquered the southern fringes of the territory, but the decisive conquest came under the auspices of Julius Caesar, who launched a series of campaigns from 58 to 50 BC, known to history as the Gallic Wars. Roman victory was effectively secured at the Battle of Alesia in 52 BC, when Caesar captured the Gallic chieftain Vercingetorix, and then set about defeating the remaining tribes. Gaul was then annexed and incorporated into the Roman state, which, over the next few centuries, flourished under its rule. The Romans built new cities, such as Lyon and Narbonne, and spread their laws, customs, and culture amongst the local populace, all the while integrating the region with the rest of the Roman world by building roads and aqueducts. Over time, the majority of Gauls lost their Celtic ways of life and adopted the Latin language, Roman customs, as well as Christianity, which led to the emergence of a distinct Gallo-Roman society. Over the following centuries, however, Roman authority across the empire began to wane, and by the turn of the 5th century AD, Gaul had witnessed numerous incursions by migrating Germanic tribes. Some of these settled across the land and established kingdoms of their own, such as the Visigoths and Burgundians. Other peoples, notably the Celts of Britain, also came to France during this time, fleeing the Anglo-Saxon invasions and settling in what is now Brittany. But it was the Franks from across the Rhine who would go on to lay the cultural and linguistic foundation of the country of France and establish a long ruling tradition that would endure for well over 1,000 years. Under the leadership of King Clovis I, the Franks went on to subjugate their neighbours over the course of the late 5th and early 6th centuries, uniting most of what was once the former territory of Roman Gaul into the domain of the Merovingian dynasty. Clovis consolidated his rule further by converting to Christianity, but upon his death in the year 511, the Frankish kingdom was divided into 4 realms amongst his sons. This resulted in a period of political fragmentation which lasted for the next 200 years, and which saw real power shift away from the ruling kings and into the hands of their chief ministers, known as the mayors of the palace. As administrators of the realm, they had to handle all manner of state affairs, from day-to-day management, finance and accounting, inventory and project management, much like an entrepreneur or business owner from today. But if any of these problems sound familiar to you, then you should check out Odoo, the sponsor of this video. Odoo is an all-in-one management software that provides entrepreneurs with a range of applications covering ERP, CRM, and website creation, as well as a comprehensive and flexible project management solution that enables individuals and businesses to track project progress, deadlines, and resources, all while collaborating in real time. Odoo lets you manage projects from start to finish by creating tasks, stages, priorities, deadlines, and detailed descriptions, with the option to break work into subtasks. It centralizes collaboration in one place, allowing you to communicate in real time share files, assign activities, and keep everyone aligned. You can then track and organize work using flexible views, including Kanban for workflows, Gantt for timelines, and List View for quick overviews and bulk actions. Odoo offers several pricing plans, but the first application is free for life, including unlimited hosting and support. You can sign up for Odoo today by using the links in the description and pinned comment below. One such mayor was Charles Martel, who won fame in the year 732 by defeating an invading Muslim army from Iberia at the Battle of Tours, which thereafter further halted the spread of Islam into Western Europe. This victory strengthened Charles and his family's reputation within the Frankish kingdom, and subsequently paved the way for his son, Pepin the Short, to depose the last Merovingian king, Childeric III, in 751, and place himself on the throne as the head of a new Carolingian dynasty. The authority of the Carolingians reached its fullest extent under Pepin's son, Charlemagne, who became king in 768 and began a process of not only reunifying the Frankish kingdom, but also expanding its borders to create an empire that would encompass much of Western and Central Europe. In recognition of his achievements, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne as Emperor of the Romans in the year 800, reviving the old imperial title and laying the groundwork for the political landscape that would define France over the course of the medieval period. Charlemagne's empire, however, would not survive long after his death, for it was split amongst his three grandsons in the year 843, with West Francia incorporating most of the territories of modern France. Although royal power was invested chiefly in the king, local nobles and warlords were able to carve out fiefdoms and dominions of their own, often by rebelling against royal authority. It was also during this time that the Vikings began to increase their activity and presence in the region. Frequent raids by the Norsemen had been carried out along the coast and rivers of France throughout the 9th century, with Paris being attacked several times, most notably in 845 and 885. But rather than continually fight the Vikings, or pay them off, King Charles the Simple decided in the early 10th century to formally incorporate these bands of marauding Norsemen into his kingdom in exchange for peace. In 911, he granted the Viking chieftain Rollo and his followers rule over the territory along the lower River Seine in exchange for their allegiance and loyalty to the French crown. This territory then became known as Normandy, the land of the Northmen, and the Norse settlers there soon adopted the French language and customs. In the year 987, the Carolingian dynasty died out, and so the Frankish nobles elected Hugh Capet, the Count of Paris, as the new king. Hugh Capet's accession to the throne marked the arrival of the Capetian dynasty, which over the following centuries would expand royal authority from the area of the Ile-de-France to the rest of the country under a centralized system of monarchy. The dawn of the new millennium brought France into the High Middle Ages, and with it, a new set of challenges that would beset the nation for the next 4 centuries. In 1066, William, Duke of Normandy, invaded England and took the throne for himself, establishing a dual Anglo-Norman realm that would henceforth intertwine English and French dynastic ambitions. It was out of this hybrid regime that a series of political marriages on both sides of the Channel took place during the 12th century, which resulted in the English royal house of Plantagenet ruling not only England, as well as parts of Wales and Ireland, but also vast swathes of western France, stretching from Normandy to Aquitaine. Although the Plantagenet lands in France were effectively vassals of the French king, having such large areas of land effectively outside of direct royal authority forced the French crown to begin seizing English-held territory in the late 12th and early 13th centuries. By 1223, most of France had been brought under the rule of the Capetian dynasty, but French power and influence was not only being consolidated within its own natural borders during this time, for it was also being exported abroad. The Crusades, which began in the late 11th century, led to thousands of French nobles and commoners alike undertaking the perilous journey to Jerusalem to reclaim the Holy Land in the name of Christendom. It was out of this conflict that several French feudal-style kingdoms emerged in the Levant, which retained connection to the French homeland via ports like Marseille, which served to transport troops, pilgrims and goods back and forth across the Mediterranean. With the arrival of the 14th century, France was the most powerful and populous kingdom in Europe. However, in 1328, the Capetian dynasty ended without a direct male heir, sparking a succession dispute between two royal houses with the strongest claims to the throne, the French House of Valois and the English House of Plantagenet. The result was a series of conflicts that would erupt intermittently over the following century, otherwise known to history as the 100 Years' War. Beginning in 1337, the early period of the war was disastrous for France, as English armies won crushing victories at Crécy in 1346 and Poitiers 10 years later, with the latter seeing the French King John II being captured and ransomed. When periods of truce were in effect, bands of marauding, unemployed soldiers roamed the countryside, looting, pillaging and killing as they went. To make matters worse, the Black Death struck France in 1348 and wrought further levels of devastation across an already beleaguered country, claiming the lives of as much as half of the population in the process. Overall, the 14th century was one of the most destructive and disruptive periods in French history, with the kingdom effectively brought to its knees under a seemingly never-ending cycle of war, famine, and pestilence. Matters worsened further in 1415, when King Henry V of England renewed the conflict and obliterated a French army at the Battle of Agincourt in October of that year, leading to an agreement in 1420 which recognized Henry and his son as the legitimate heirs to the French throne. It seemed that France was on the verge of collapse, yet in 1429, the emergence of a young peasant woman named Joan of Arc dramatically reversed France's fortunes. Claiming that she was divinely guided, Joan inspired the French troops to win a series of victories over the English, lifting the siege of Orléans and escorting the disinherited French prince, the Dauphin, to Reims to be crowned as King Charles VII. Although she was later captured and executed by the English in 1431, her example rallied the French nation to drive out the English once and for all. By 1453, the 100 Years' War was effectively brought to an end. France had emerged victorious and was now a much stronger and more unified kingdom than ever before. The advent of the 16th century saw France develop into a modern nation-state, with its population reaching over 15 million people by the year 1500. However, after incorporating further territories in Burgundy and Brittany, it was effectively hemmed in on all sides by domains belonging to the powerful Austrian royal House of Habsburg. What followed was the beginning of a rivalry between the French and the Habsburgs, which would engulf European affairs over the next 300 years. The first of these conflicts were the Italian Wars, fought from 1494 to 1559, as King Charles VIII and his successors vied with Habsburg Spain and others for influence in Italy. These campaigns ultimately brought little in the way of territorial gain for France, but they nevertheless opened up contact with Italy, which allowed for the transmission of emerging Renaissance influences. King Francis I was an enthusiastic patron of the arts and learning, who subsequently made his court at Fontainebleau a centre of painting and architectural brilliance, which subsequently sparked the development of the Renaissance in France. Further to this spirit of progress was the commencement of voyages by French explorers, such as Jacques Cartier, who began setting sail to establish new settlements in the recently discovered Americas.